I'm so sorry. There's been a major glitch between the hosts because I'm not the technical host, but we all share the same Zoom ID. So it's been very difficult to try and not be the host in this matter. So I think anyway, Oppu, will you take over, please? Thank you. I'm very sorry for the delay. Hello, everybody. Hello, Richard. Very sorry. Let's start. Oppo, I think you need to unmute.
Hello. হ্যাঁ, শোনা যাচ্ছে?
Yeah.
নমস্কার, আমি দেশ পাবলিশিং এর পক্ষ থেকে অপু, আমার ভালো নাম শুভঙ্কর দে। যাই হোক, আসলে আমরা গত বছর থেকে এই অনুষ্ঠান শুরু করেছি। 1978 সালে প্রথম উপন্যাস আমি অনুপম প্রকাশের প্রায় 8 বছর পরে আমাদের সঙ্গে যোগাযোগ। 1986 সালে দেশ থেকে তার প্রথম প্রকাশিত উপন্যাসটি পুনঃপ্রকাশিত হয়। সেই 86 সাল থেকে দেশ পাবলিশিং এর সঙ্গে যোগাযোগ। যে শুধু লেখিকা সম্পর্কে বাবার অভিভাবক এবং ডাকেন দিদি বলে। সেই দিদির ডাকের সুবাদে আমি পিসি বলে ডাকতাম। যে মঞ্চে ৮০তম জন্মদিন পালন করলাম, সেই রবীন্দ্র সদন মঞ্চে 2019 সালের 20শে নভেম্বর পিসিকে নিয়ে স্মরণ সভার আয়োজন করতে হবে, এটা ভাবতে পারিনি। 2020 সালের 82তম জন্মদিন আমরা পিসিকে ঘিরে সেই রবীন্দ্র সদনেই আয়োজন করেছিলাম। নবনীতা দেব সেনের পরিবার ও দেশ পাবলিশিং যৌথভাবে আয়োজন করে স্মারক বক্তৃতা। প্রথম বছর বলেছিলেন অমর্ত্য সেন। আজ সেই স্মারক বক্তৃতার 2য় বর্ষ। এমন এক কঠিন পরিস্থিতির মধ্যে দিয়ে চলেছি আমরা, যেখানে একে অপরের কাছে আসতে পারছি না। 21 সালে স্মারক বক্তৃতার আমরা আয়োজন করেছি এই অনলাইনে জুম নামক আধুনিক প্রযুক্তির মাধ্যমে। আজকের এই অনুষ্ঠানটা আমরা দুটো পর্যায়ে ভাগ করেছি। প্রথমটা হচ্ছে স্মারক বক্তৃতা, যিনি বলবেন তিনি রিচার্ড গম্ব্রিজ, আর তারপরে গান এবং আলোচনা, নানান রকম কথাবার্তা, তার লেখা পাঠ। সেখানে থাকছেন মৌসুমী ভৌমিক, সংহিতা আর্নি এবং নবনীতা দেবসেনের ছোট মেয়ে নন্দনা দেবসেন। আর এই সম্পূর্ণ অনুষ্ঠানটা
Another technical glitch, I think, there. কি করে হলো? কে সেটা? I don't know who that is.
তোমার কথা আমরা শুনতে পাচ্ছি।
Hello, Antara. Yes, we seem to have lost Apu. I'm just seeing if he's going to come back in for a second.
Right. So should we continue? Should we?
It may be worth it. I can't tell when we'll have him back in. I'm afraid I'm keeping an eye out to see if he comes back in.
Okay. In the meantime, I think they wanted to show a video that they had. Could that be shown, perhaps?
No, we have shown already that
Oh, that's been shown.
from 7th. Yeah.
Okay, so I think then let me just continue since that was Oppo Day. For those of you who don't follow Bangla, let me just quickly give you a recap. And I'm sorry that we lost Oppo's connection here. As I said, there has been a problem with this Zoom link. Not the link, sorry, with our own session. Session of Zoom. That was Oppo Day of Day's Publishing. It's one of the major publishers in Bengali. He was talking very fondly of Professor Nabanita Devsen and how it was almost a family relationship between Oppo, his father, and my mother. So I'm Antara Devsen. I'm Nabanita's daughter. So he was also telling us how he had celebrated my mother's birthday in Rabindra Sadan, one of the biggest auditoriums in Kolkata, and was very sad to also have her memorial service there after she passed away in November 2019. It is true that this publishing has been celebrating Nabanita's birthday for some time, for some years now. I remember the 80th birthday that they celebrated was huge. It was had about 1,100 people, and it was a very big and very loving affair. The 81st birthday the following year was also very exciting and loving, and although it wasn't as big, of course. So, but sadly, the 82nd birthday was different. That was last year. And so instead of the fun that we had and all the laughter, we did have last year, we had the first Nabanita Devsen Memorial Lecture that was delivered by someone who knew her very well for over 6 decades, my father, Amartya Sen. This year we are privileged to have with us another very old friend of my mother's, Professor Richard Gombrich, who, as you know, is an illustrious academic and hugely respected Indologist. He's in the University of Oxford, and the chair of this session, Mr. Shomik Bandyopadhyay, will introduce Professor Gombrich shortly. We are all, especially my sister Nandana and I, and Opu from Days Publishing, we are particularly grateful to Professor Gombrich because not only because he agreed to deliver this lecture at short notice, because this year, thanks to the COVID situation, we weren't sure whether we would have the memorial lecture at all. So we are very grateful that he agreed at short notice, number one, and that he agreed to do it when there was this lockdown and he didn't have physical access to material because of the COVID situation. And of course, number three, that he agreed to do it on Zoom, which is still very mysterious for a lot of us, and with good reason, as you could see. And also the fact that this is really something we are very grateful for. He has been, Professor Gombrich has been quite unwell, and I'm very grateful that he didn't let us down, that although he has been unwell, and Mrs. Gombrich too, both of them have got a bug and have been unwell, but Professor Gombrich has still worked on this lecture and is here with us today. Thank you very much, Richard. And I will now hand over hand over, meaning I will ask Mr. Shomik Bandyopadhyay to take over from here. Those of you who are in Bengal already know Mr. Bandyopadhyay. I will, those of you who are not in Bengal, let me just quickly tell you about him. He's an eminent publisher, an editor, a scholar, and a critic of the arts. He was founder editor of Seagull Books and Thema, two very interesting and influential publishing houses. Among his several academic and non-academic assignments, Mr. Bandyopadhyay has served as producer emeritus of All India Radio and Doordarshan, vice chairman of the National School of Drama, the regional editor of Oxford University Press, and as the National Tagore Fellow at the School of Arts and Aesthetics, JNU, that's Jawaharlal Nehru University. Another thing that Opu was explaining was the format of this evening's program. We will first have the memorial lecture by Professor Gombrich, following which we will move on to the second part of the program, which will focus on Nobunita's works on Sita. We will briefly discuss her work on the women's Ramayanas and get a flavor of the songs that influenced it, and we will also get a flavor of her poetry. So that's this evening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for bearing with us while we try to sort out our Zoom problems. And it's over to you, Mr. Shomik Bandyopadhyay. I think you need to unmute first. You need to unmute.
Can I be heard now?
Yes, yes.
I belong to a generation that considers another Gombrich, Sir Ernest Gombrich, as a sort of Ekalavya Acharya or Guru for all of us who ever ventured into art history and cultural history. So it's a special privilege and a joy to welcome his equally illustrious son, Richard Gombrich, to deliver the Nobunita Dev Sen Memorial Lecture, the second in the series. And if Nobunita had been around, she would have been delighted and would have enjoyed this occasion like all such occasions that she really enjoyed. And her participation was not just a formal listening or a formal commentary or anything of the kind, a total engagement. And that's where we shall be missing Nobunita this evening. And really, it would have been wonderful if she had been here and sharing this rare experience with all of us. Though I need not really go into detail, still it's part of formality to introduce Professor Gombrich formally. He had founded the Oxford Center for Buddhist Studies in 2004 after his retirement from the Bodin Chair of Sanskrit at Oxford University and a professorial fellowship at Balliol College for 28 years. And as director of this new center since 2004, he has been academic director of this entire setup and all its activities, varied activities, and been chief editor of its journal since it began in 2011. His academic interests, we know, are Pali, early Buddhism, Buddhism in Sri Lanka, and the anthropology and sociology of religion. Interests that have produced more than 200 publications over all these years, a great academic achievement. With these few words of introduction, I request Professor Richard Gombrich to deliver the second Navanita Dev Sen Memorial Lecture. Professor Gombrich.
Thank you very much indeed for that very kind, indeed excessively flattering introduction. And it is true that I had to undertake this tribute to my old friend Navanita Dev Sen at very short notice, but that was more than compensated for by the pleasure I have in being thus made prominent among those who worship her memory and think that we cannot do too much to celebrate it. The Sahitya Academy, as I'm sure all my present audience is well aware, publishes a bi-monthly journal called Indian Literature, and this was guest edited for March-April 2020 by A.J. Thomas, number 316. I mention this dry fact because this number is valuable to us in several ways and will long remain valuable, for it provides basic material from Navanita's poems in several languages to bibliographic information collected by A.J. Thomas and some fine articles of appreciation from close associates of Professor Deb Sen. I cannot sufficiently praise these articles, which begin, in the order of their publication, with one by her daughter Antara, whom we have already met here today, though she had the unpleasant task of discussing technical problems. However, I have to make choices in terms of theme and of flavor, so I begin by rapidly drawing attention to the editor's excellent summary of that number of the Sahitya Academy's journal. He tells us that Navanita left more than 135 books to her name. She studied at Presidency College at Jadavpur, Jadavpur, at Indiana University, Harvard, Cambridge, and Berkeley universities. She retired after teaching there for many years as professor of comparative literature at Jadavpur. She was world famous as a scholar of ancient and medieval European literature, teaching Homer, Ovid, Dante, Greek tragedy, and vast areas of Sanskrit and other Indian literature. In Bengali, she published more than 20-volume novels and 4 collections of poetry. And as Mr. Thomas wrote, her contributions to the genres of short story and children's literature are worthy of special mention, as well as her translations of children's literature, and she crowned herself in glory with her most entertaining and interesting travel writing. Now, in the final paragraph of his very summary account of her accomplishments, Thomas writes about the Radha Krishna Memorial Lectures at Oxford. And as I too will be concluding by mentioning them, I leave them to the last part of my lecture. But I cannot further postpone mention of what I have chosen as my principal theme for today. As Thomas writes, she was probably unique among comparativists in making India the basis of her comparative vision of world literature. On this, she herself wrote, "A recognizably Indian characteristic can be sorted out if all literatures of India are put through the sieve of thematic analysis. We have all suffered the same famines, fought the same wars, survived the same riots and other forms of subtler destructions. The pre-colonial cultures, that is, the ancient, classical, and medieval cultures, the colonial impact and the post-colonial self-seeking can all be seen as a continuous process of development of a whole people, reflected in a whole literature." I am quoting these words, taking them from the quotation by Professor Shayantan Dash Gupta, who I believe is also in the audience tonight, at the end of his evocative essay about Nabanita. And here I must confess to having made another choice in order to select facets of Nabanita's life and work to which to draw attention in a limited time. Shayantan Das Gupta begins the fine encomium which he published in that journal, quote, "So indomitable was her spirit, so feisty was her nature, and so unstinting was her love for students, colleagues, and friends, that it is easier to celebrate her life than to mourn her passing away. She was not only a great scholar, but no less a great teacher. She must be celebrated as a great academic because she was a great teacher, and as a great teacher because she was a great personality." Professor Dash Gupta has caught this so well that at this point I need to confess to having composed a kind of lecture within a lecture, and the title of my lecture within the lecture is "Difficult to Mourn, but Easy to Celebrate, in admiration of a great teacher and her pupil." That is my title, largely borrowed from Professor Dash Gupta. For Nabanita could have been coined the famous Latin adage, "Scripta manent." It is the writings that remain. On the one hand, she had such warmth and empathy, so rich and vibrant a personality, that she made a deep and lasting impression on all those who had the fortune to know her. On the other hand, she was a fine scholar, a polyglot, who made a permanent contribution to our appreciation of world literature, and was no less distinguished as a creative writer in many genres, from poetry to journalism. How does one respond to such a breadth of interest and passionate involvement. It helps, I think, to consider her life and achievement as centering around her engagement as a teacher, not just of students, but of anyone who was willing to expose themselves to her influence. Nobonita's relationship with the Department of Comparative Literature at Jadavpur University spanned more than 30 years. Having studied there herself, as one of the first batch of graduates in that field, she began to teach there from 1972 and did so until around 2002. The department, the first of its kind in India, had been set up by Buddhadev Bose in 1956. Bose promoted the idea vigorously in his 1959 Defense of Comparative Literature in the yearbook of Comparative and General Literature of that year, 59. And it can be traced back to a speech given by Rabindranath Tagore in 1906 at the National Council of Education, the precursor of Jadavpur itself. When one digs for the roots of cultural studies and of interests in modern Calcutta, it's not long before one's archaeologist's trowel strikes against Rabindranath. Even if we allow for some time lags, one can thus see that Tagore passed the baton to Buddhadev Bose, Buddhadeva to Nobonita. Among her pupils was Shayontan Dasgupta, who now heads that department, and published in the commemorative booklet on Nobonita's death the sensitive appreciation on which I have relied for most of my material in this short piece. Since comparative literature has never been my own field, I trust that he will forgive me the obvious plagiarism. In his last footnote, he enables me to carry that story a stage further, for he writes, quote, "Comparative literature remained to Nobonita Devchen essential for the concept of an Indian literature, and she saw the former as being organic to the Indian literary culture, given its diversity. No wonder then that she was deeply involved in the comparative literature movement in India, having first helped found the Indian National Comparative Literature Association, the precursor of the present-day Comparative Literature Association of India, and later having been its vice president." End quote. So let me return to the transmission from teacher to pupil. Shayontan writes, "I remember her teaching us a clutch of texts in the 1990s when I was a student in the department, texts that ranged from Ovid's Metamorphoses to the flood episode in the Bible to troubadour and minnezang poetry. The number of texts that she taught us wasn't very large, but the texts she did teach us, the classes she did take with us, were quite unforgettable. Her lectures bore powerful testimony to her passion for comparative literature, a discipline that privileged the holistic study of world literature over a fragmented approach, that insisted on looking at multiple literary texts and traditions from different languages and countries. She introduced us to the idea that the study of literature could be audacious, perhaps could and should would be just as well, one could easily cross the boundaries of language and nation and compare and contrast texts that were written originally in different languages from very different parts of the world. She subscribed to the idea that limitation of language should not hold us back from the pleasures of sampling the riches of world literature. An idea which, as I have just shown, can be traced back via Buddhadev Bose to Rabindranath Tagore himself. With Nobonitadi, Shayantan has written, we undertook the simultaneous adventures of time travel and teleportation, transgressing at once the constraints of time and space. As we read the Gilgamesh against the Bible or Chaucer's Canterbury Tales in the light of Boccaccio's Decameron, we had our first taste of world literature and also our first understanding of the ties that bind together all literary creations, irrespective of the languages in which they were originally composed. It was impossible to read the English Chaucer and not be reminded immediately of the Italian Boccaccio, not to be palpably conscious of the frame-tailed technique shared by both writers. For the community of world writers is enmeshed in an intimate network of inspiration, influence, and reception. We realized what we would have lost if we had surrendered to the hegemonic claims of the linguistic axis and refused to look beyond the paradigm of single language literature. The network of connections that gives birth to, sustains, and nourishes new literature. The incessant dialogue between writers of different languages, countries, and ages, all of this would have remained beyond our ken. That the study of literature could be fun without compromising on the rigor of scholarship, this too we learned from Nobonitadi. Surely one of the most valuable lessons one can acquire in life. Yet the interactions, and I'm still now quoting Shayantan, the interactions we had outside the classroom are just as important as the ones we had with her in the classroom. Not only was Nobonitadi passionate about the things she taught, a polyglot, a scholar, and a versatile creative writer, whose pen traversed multiple genres, from humor to travel to fiction to poetry to critical nonfiction. But she was, above all, a warm and a witty human being. When we were first-year students, one of our professors, Shubhir Roy Chaudhary, the redoubtable scholar of 19th century Bangla literature, fell ill. Some of the students stayed up nights in the hospital for Shubhir Babu. On one such night, it was my own turn, along with two friends. Nobonitadi, with her characteristic generosity, made it a point to cook an elaborate dinner for us before we headed for the hospital. What will the children eat after all? Then there was the occasion when we did some readings for a departmental event. And after our readings, Nobonitadi rushed up to us and said, "You kids were so good. Hearing you, our chests swelled up to become like Gina Lollobrigida." All of this accompanied by miming suitable actions. As first-year students who had only recently left the environments of school life, we were left quite embarrassed. We soon realized that this innocent spontaneity was what best defined Nobonitadi. as a person. The last time I met her was at her house a few months before she passed away. She was already quite unwell. But she carried on a spirited conversation. The conversation, after some time, naturally turned to the department. She expressed a grouse, which I realized she had been nursing for some time. She expressed her feelings that our department needed to encourage not just critical thinking and writing, but should also foster creative writing among our students. After all, the Department of Comparative Literature was founded by Buddhadev Bose, known primarily as a creative writer, and many of its faculty, down the ages, had been among the leading creative writers of their times. Such a department would remain true to its heritage only if it encouraged creativity. So she declared in her unambiguous no-nonsense tone, a tone only she could successfully adopt. I later realized that the sentiments evinced by Navanita Di are relevant to all university departments of literature in India. After all, active involvement in creating a work of art can only augment one's critical understanding of the artistic process itself. Scholars of the future will continue to be inspired by her work on the thematic structure of epic poems in the Eastern and Western worlds. She started off by exploring the traditional reception of the Indian epics in the Western world. Western scholars like Jan de Vries and Johann Jacob Meyer had viewed the Indian tradition as being essentially different from the Western epic tradition. Navanita argued that this contrast drawn by Western scholars was shallow, and that those scholars were guilty of exaggerating the distance between the Indian and the Western epics in terms of general thematic and formulaic picture, as well as of overlooking the differences between the Western epics themselves in their thematic details. In order to prove her point, she made a painstaking comparison between the Ramayana and 12 other epics, 10 of them from Europe, and examined how many of the established epic themes could be said to be common to them. The breadth of her erudition and commitment to this kind of inbred study was evident from the list of the epics she took for thematic comparison. This list included the creation epic, Enuma Elish, the Gilgamesh, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Beowulf, the Nibelungenlied, the Chanson de Roland, Kalevala, Die Jenis Acritas, and El Cid. While, she contended, in its epic portions the Ramayana was like the Odyssey, epic battle call, it resembled the Iliad in other ways. She pointed, I'll read that again. While in its episodic portions, the Ramayana was like the Odyssey in its epic battle core, it resembled the Iliad, she contended, in other ways. She pointed to the thematic similarities between the Iliad and the Ramayana, highlighting the abduction of a woman and the consequent destruction of Troy and Lanka, respectively, and went on to conclude that in many ways the Iliad was actually more similar to the Ramayana than it was to the Kalevala. Yet she did not stop there. She went on to probe the politics of the Western reception of the Indian epics. Why did Western scholars find the Indian text so strange, different, and exotic, notwithstanding the evident similarities in the Indian and Western epic traditions. Again, we find here a dialogue that Navanita Devshen establishes with Tagore, a figure she returns to so many times in her own oeuvre. One is immediately reminded of Tagore's essay in Prachin Sahitya, where he tried to put forward the generic characteristics of the Ramayana and to understand in their context the Western epics such as the Iliad and the Odyssey. He confronted head-on the preconceptions that have traditionally colored Western reception of Indian literature. In this essay, Tagore took up the case for judging the Ramayana and the Mahabharata by their own yardstick, not by any yardstick culled out of a study of Western epics, or by any norms based on the Western literary canon. The Indian literary tradition could not be read merely as derivative discourse. It would be patently unfair to judge the Ramayana and its success as an epic based on a Western model, for it was never composed with that kind of a model as its goal. Devshen's point of entry into the debate is different from Tagore's. Nevertheless, the realization of the importance of interrogating Western discourses on Indian literature ties both Tagore's and Devshen's essays together. This is, of course, only one of Navanita Devshen's attempts to understand the varied dimensions of the Ramayana. There are even writings where she has gone beyond the epic tradition and made insightful comparisons between oral poetry and classical poetry. For instance, between Valmiki's Ramayana on the one hand and Kalidasa's Raghuvansham on the other. This goes to show her multifaceted interest in the Ramayana tradition. Devshen was one of the pioneers in unearthing, acknowledging, and popularizing the plurality of the Ramayana tradition in India. There are few who have worked so ceaselessly to highlight how the Ramayana is not a fixed body, but a living text, which exists in so many different incarnations, which could be made to yield so many different afterlives. Devshen went back again and again to the possibilities recondite within the narrative of the Ramayana and posited it as a repository for undertaking positive social change. This brings us, not quite finally, but nearly finally, to gender. Gender was an overwhelmingly important axis along which Navanita sought to find and create this change. The text of hers that comes immediately to mind is the Bangla Shita Teke Shuru, a pioneering collection of stories. Though that collection was published in book form only in 1996, the stories were published over a long period of time, some going back even to the 1970s. Shita Teke Shuru is a very important work in Devshen's oeuvre, for it reflects a literary stimulus that later finds manifestation in the writings of many women writers from different Indian languages, and also because it throws into sharp relief the interface between Devshen's research and scholarly activities on the one hand, and her creative activities on the other. There is indeed a narrative implicit in the very architecture of this collection, Shita Teke Shuru. It's divided into three parts. The first, Pauraniki, goes back to Puranic themes, and the third, Adhuniki, brings us to the present. And straddling these two worlds, the ancient and the modern, stands the second section called Matriarchy, which presents a series of personal sketches. Few of Deb Shen's writings highlight her credentials as a feminist writer, as does Shita Tekeshuru. In the introduction to the volume, she writes that she was always struck by the women who had been portrayed in the Indian epic tradition, be it Shita or Draupadi, Taraka or Shurpanakha. It was as if these women had been born only to wallow in misery. It is with the idea of tweaking their narratives, and perhaps at least in some of them, of wresting for them a claim to agency, that Deb Shen takes up their narratives and reinscribes them. Following the traditional narrative, she merely exploits the possibilities always inherent in them, thereby again highlighting the narrative potential of the Ramayana tradition, celebrating it as a living and dynamic text. The 6 stories in the Pauraniki section, then, have a direct relationship to the strand of feminist writings by writers like Sarah Joseph, Ambai, Gracie, Pratibha Roy, and many others who have gone on to rewrite episodes from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata with the objective of foregrounding the agency claim of the women characters who people these texts. Everyday lives of women come back again and again in Deb Shen's stories. Sometimes they're written in a comical vein, only to reveal a deeply philosophical core once the reader reaches the kernel. Such is the case, for example, in her story Madhyaratri Bhayankar, which we carried in English translation in Navonita 79, a festschrift I put together to celebrate her stepping into the 80s. It details the hilarious exploits of a woman, a mother of 2, where she attempts to learn how to ride a moped, egged on by her daughters and the neighborhood beggar, and her nocturnal adventures as she tries to pick up these skills. But even as one laughs one's guts out, one is palpably conscious of the gender stereotyping that the story critiques so trenchantly. Similarly, deep philosophical questions about identity, about nationhood and politics emerge from a seemingly hilarious story like Uttarkanda, where Lakshman falls head over heels in love with beef kebab and becomes Nawab Lakshmanullah, and Urmila becomes transformed into Umrao Begum. Thus, the idea of India and the notion of unity in diversity remained lifelong concerns for Navonita. That is, in a sense, the end of the lecture I have written, but not totally. You must have a little more patience. For I was asked to do something else besides compose a lecture myself, and that is to read to you the foreword that I wrote for the book on Shita, on the Ramayana Shita, written by Navadita, and it requires a little explanation. The Radha Krishnan Memorial Lectureship is a scheme whereby once a year, a distinguished scholar is invited to Oxford University in the United Kingdom to give a short series of academic lectures on a subject or theme pertaining to India. The scheme is generously funded by the Indian government and connected to All Souls College, where the philosopher and scholar Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, first Vice President and second President of India, briefly held a university chair at Oxford. Now, early in 1997, These lectures, the Radha Krishnan Memorial Lectures, were given by Professor Nobonita Debsen while she was Professor of Comparative Literature at Jadavpur. I was asked to chair the lectures, and later on, I was also asked to write a foreword when they were to be published in a book form. As that publication is still now almost exactly 25 years or a quarter of a century later, still awaited by an eager public, her daughter Antara Debsen has kindly suggested that at this point, I read to you, it isn't very long, my foreword to those lectures. And that is, my reading that foreword will conclude my active part in the proceedings. The constellation of the Radha Krishnan lectures shines bright in the academic firmament, but no star in that constellation shines brighter than Nobonita. While studying at Harvard University many years earlier, she had undertaken research on the Sanskrit epic, the Ramayana, and she has always had a lively interest in women's literature, as well as contributing to it herself. It was thus extremely appropriate that she chose as her theme the traditions of literature related to the Ramayana that have been composed all over India by women, often in anonymous songs. No one in the whole world could claim to rival Nobonita's expertise in this area, for she had done extensive field work in many parts of India and Bangladesh, both searching for manuscripts and rare publications, and hearing live renditions by women of their songs. Nobonita's lectures excelled not only in their content, but also in their delivery. She was famous for her public readings of her poetry, and her expressive voice and histrionic talent lifted her lectures out of the ruck of drab performance, which is, alas, so normal among academics. Usually, the audience for an academic lecture series declines as the series continues. But in her case, the opposite occurred, and I well remember that the start of her final lecture was delayed because the audience had so grown that it was necessary to shift to a larger room. It's a pity that there's no video of the lectures, so that this dimension of Nobonita's accomplishment was not preserved and is not available to her readers or other admirers. Readers of this book, remember I'm writing this as a foreword to her book, readers of this book should be aware that though the lectures were presented as a series, they formed no part of any course at the university. People could attend whatever they chose. This meant that while the lectures complemented each other, each lecture had to be more or less self-contained. The lecturer had to provide some repetition, though not too much. The general theme is expressed in the opening of the second lecture, quote, "Epic poets the world over are men singing the glory of other men, armed men to be precise. The ideals of the epic world obviously do not have much to share with women, nor do women enjoy the heroic values. So what happens when women choose to retell an epic? This thought she then applies to the Sanskrit epic poem, the Ramayana, particularly with regard to the epic's hero Rama and his wife Sita. The first lecture is devoted to two versions of the Ramayana, both composed by women in the 16th century. Though nowadays little known, both versions survive more or less intact, and so does some basic information about their authors. One is composed in Telugu by a lower caste woman called Molla, who is plausibly said to have been a concubine of King Krishnadeva Raya, who ruled in what is now Andhra Pradesh. The other is in Bengali, composed by a poor Brahmin woman called Chandravati, who lived in a village called Kishorgani sorry, it's misprint here, a village called Kishorganj in Mymensingh, now in Bangladesh. Her father was a wandering minstrel, and like Molla, she never married. Molla lived at court and evidently knew Sanskrit and literature and all its styles and conventions extremely well. Chandrapati had never been exposed to urban culture. Navanita gives us concise but vivid descriptions of the two compositions, which could indeed hardly be more different. Neither work has been translated, and her accounts of them fill her audience with curiosity. Surely one thinks the day must soon come when translations will be made and published. However, this first lecture reserved its greatest excitement for its last few minutes. Navanita's field research produced a major discovery. Here I can only alert you to the main point. Critics one and all had dismissed her Ramayana as Chandrabhati's worst work, weak in both style and structure, and, to boot, incomplete. It reads like a story of, and partly narrated by, Sita. Rama's great victory in battle over Ravana is mentioned only as a flashback. The songs are about what Sita has herself witnessed and experienced, or has dreamt. This is no accident. The whole work, despite its title, is a Sitayana, the story of Sita. The songs are in a simple, unsophisticated style, of which he gives examples in the next lecture. Though locals have forgotten Chandravati, some will sing these and similar songs. Navanita has realized that the songs in Chandravati's Ramayana are deliberately composed in this authentic oral genre. Indeed, some may not be by her, but could be material which she collected. Others may be her own compositions in that same genre. Thus, what we have today may be a mixture, further adulterated by the passage of time. The criticism for ineptitude is entirely misplaced, a failure to recognize a completely original piece of work which has come to us down the centuries. The second lecture is on the Ramayana songs sung by the rural women of India and Bangladesh, all of anonymous authorship. Specifically, they are songs in Bengali, Marathi, Maithili, and Telugu, and they are all about Sita. Navanita explains why Sita is the favorite woman in Indian mythology. She goes through the typical woman's life cycle of puberty, marriage, mistreatment by her in-laws, pregnancy, childbirth, and all too often abandonment, or at least neglect. While there are a few themes which are more or less peculiar to local traditions, by and large, the experiences recalled and the sentiments expressed are remarkably uniform throughout the subcontinent. There is not a great deal of narrative in these poems, but they are mostly responses to suffering. Sita has lent dignity, even glamour, to suffering, writes Navanita. When there is no escape from suffering, one prefers to accept it with grace. Sita helps women to do just that. She is a victim who suffers in grandeur without being vengeful. She is prey, but never turns predator. The whole of the third and final lecture is about a unique book called Ramayana Vishavruksham, written in Telugu prose by a contemporary lady called Ranganayakamma, Amma being a suffix to the personal name of a married woman. This lady grew up in the countryside. Namadita describes her as self-educated, but she did take her school final examination. After some years, she left her husband, took her children, and settled down with a much younger man called Dr. Bapuji, an admirer who continued to share her literary work, living on the edge of Hyderabad. Though she is reclusive, Navanita went and stayed with her. Moreover, Dr. Bapuji worked with her. Navanita writes that she herself knows no Telugu, so Dr. Bapuji did most of the translation and explanation. Vishavruksham, as my audience today probably knows, means poison tree. The book is very long and defies classification by genre, a fact which reminds us of what has been discovered about Chandrabhati's work. This massive composition is at the same time an innovative retelling of the Ramayana story and a book about the Ramayana, which is subjected to a polemical Marxist analysis. In both aspects, it is a violent attack on the figure of Rama, including his attitude to and treatment of women. He is the poison tree who has corrupted the whole of Indian society and culture. I there end my lecture, and I believe the first half of these proceedings. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Professor Gombrich, for your, which revived and brought Nabanita back to us in her wide range of engagement, life directly, and living the students, even the Jinala Brigida pride, all that leading on to the scholarship, the painstaking scholarship, part of her extensive travels through India. So even as she was capturing India, realizing India, through her daily communication with people spread all over the country, she was reading India through her texts, not only the epics, the traditional texts, lost texts, new texts, text sometimes ideated, independent writing. And in your treatment, in your presentation of Nabanita, what you really brought out was the very, very special quality of literary sensibility, a sensibility that naturally straddles the academic and the creative and the daily social. And all that goes into her writings. We shall be waiting for the publication for which we've waited for so long, And we're grateful to you for sharing with us the foreword, for which we are also waiting along with the publication. Thank you once again, Professor Cambridge.
Thank you.
Will Antara please take over for a minute?
Okay. We will now move on to the second part of this program. Thank you so much, Richard. It was really wonderful. I just wanted to mention that Dr. A.J. Thomas is here with us, and so is Shayantan, who I assume is the pupil that you mentioned that foxed us all in the title. So thank you very much. It was really wonderful. Moving on to the second part, which is about Nabanita's Sita, I would like to request my sister Nandana to read a couple of poems of Ma's on Sita, after which, of course, Mr. Bandopadhyay will take over again. This is probably only because I think there is another technical glitch that we're encountering. I'm the Stepney, I'm the extra tire here who moves in when there's a glitch and who can't get out of a glitch I couldn't get out of my glitch in the beginning as it was. Okay, Nandana, would you please read?
Yes, of course. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. It's so great to see all of you. Ma would have been delighted to see everyone gathered here. I want to give all our thanks to Opu and Days Publications for bringing us together across the world during and despite a raging pandemic, and giving us an opportunity to celebrate our mother's birthday and her legacy. Richard, we cannot thank you enough for that marvelous lecture which you prepared, as Antara mentioned, while you were extremely unwell. You have been completely heroic, and your lecture would have meant the world to Ma as it does to us. So thank you. Shomik Mama, it is great to see you after a very long time. It's wonderful to hear you speak so lovingly, eloquently about Ma's literary sensibility. And Moshumi and Sanghita, I'm so excited to hear both of you speak and at least one of you sing. Now, I know we're all missing Ma very much today, so I would love to take a moment to bring her voice, both in English and in Bengali, into our gathering today. I want to read first a couple of lines that she wrote, which give us a glimpse of why she was so deeply influenced in her own creative work by women's retellings of the Ramayana. This is from an essay titled, "Who is the Mother of These Words?", which she wrote shortly before she started translating Chandrabuti's Ramayana. She writes, I quote, "Looking at Bengali women's poetry from Rami and Chandrabuti to Radharani and myself, we have seen marginalized women craftily moving in towards center stage through poetry. We see that poetry can become a powerful weapon in the hand of the disempowered and elevate their lives. As I am grateful to my mother's poetry, which opened the door for me to walk through, I am equally grateful to my foremothers in the villages of India, who are still singing the songs of Sita and Draupadi and narrating our own life stories." Unquote. Now, these words contextualize the two Bengali poems by Ma that I'm going to read to you today, both of which show the deep impact that the women from our epics had on Ma's work. The first is Sita's backstory, if you will, and it unfolds as a ballad in simple rhyme. It's full of folksy humor and, of course, feminist irony. The second is deliberately written in a much more classical style. It has a much more complex meter, and it has multiple references to the grand battles from our epics, as well as allusions to the ordeals that Sita and Draupadi had to go through, making it a poem about and for every woman, and also a poem about our mother's indomitable spirit. These poems could not be more different in terms of form, but both focus on the fundamental strength of the woman and her indestructibility. Now, the first one, although I've translated a great deal of mass poetry, I have not translated this yet. So I will, I'm not worried about Richard at all, because I know he understands Bengali very well. And in fact, he used to have long conversations in Bengali with Songjukta Mashi's mother. But for those of us who are with us today who may not be as fluent in Bangla, let me give you a little gist of what happens in this poem. It's called Sitar Patra Sandhane, or Finding a Match for Sita. And this poem is a conversation between Sita's parents when they discover, alarmingly, two things. One, that Sita is growing up incredibly fast and is entirely too nubile to be kept unmarried at home for much longer. And second, that she is in fact superhumanly strong. She has superhuman strength. What they discover, much to their consternation, is that she can effortlessly sweep the floor with the Horodhonuk, which, as we know, is that immovably heavy and divine bow of Shiva's that Ram had to string in order to be able to marry Sita. So what happens in the poem is that when King Jonok discovers his daughter's strength, he is distraught because he's convinced that Sita's strength disqualifies her as a desirable bride, and is sure that no man would wish to marry a woman who was as strong as Sita. So with a heavy heart, he sets off on a journey to find a groom who is at least as strong as Sita. সীতার পাত্র সন্ধানে। এদিক পানে একটু শোনো দেখি, মেয়ে তোমার ধিঙ্গি হলেন বেশ, পাত্রটাত্র দেখতে বেরুবে কি, লোকের কথায় ভরবে এবার দেশ। উঠোনটাতে লেপতে গিয়ে যেই আঁচলখানা খসলো মেয়ের, হায় অমনি খেয়াল হলো আমার, এই ডবকা মেয়ে আর ঘরে মানায়। রানীর কথায় জনক রাজার টনক নড়ল যখন, মেয়ের দিকে চেয়ে রাজা খেলেন 2 নম্বরের চমক। হরধনুক তুলে রাজার মেয়ে আপন মনে লেপছে উঠোন। আরে রাজার তো প্রায় হার্ট ফেল হয়। ইস, এই ভারীটা সীতা তুলতে পারে, কচি হাতে কি কাজ করেছিস। ওরে বাবা, জনক রাজা ভাবেন, এমন বলবতী আমার মেয়ে, যোগ্য পাত্র কোথায় খুঁজে পাবেন, দেখতে হবে দেশ বিদেশে যে। জনক রাজার মন হলো খারাপ, রানী তোমার মেয়ে থাকবে ঘরে, কপাল দোষে এমন বেটির বাপ হয়েছি, ওকে কেউ নেবে না পরে। রানী বলেন, আমার সীতার ঘর জুটবে না এই মিথিলা নগরে, মুঙ্গেরে যাও, মগধে যাও, বর পারবে তুমি আনতে রাজা ধরে। তখন মাথায় পাগড়িখানা বেঁধে, লাঠির ডগায় পুঁটলিটা ঝুলিয়ে জনক রাজা রওনা হলেন, কেঁদে রানী দাঁড়ান দরজাতে ঠেস দিয়ে। কেউ দেখেনি অপুর ঝরকাতে, কে দাঁড়িয়ে জানলায় চোখ ভরা, আধ খাওয়া এক পেয়ারা ডান হাতে, অন্য হাতে আনমনে শিখ ধরা। I'll just translate the last 4 lines. No one saw the girl upstairs, standing behind that windowsill, a half-eaten fruit in her hand, dreaming she clutched the iron grill. Now, the second poem that I'm going to read is one of her most iconic poems, and it is more relevant in these befuddling, divisive times than ever. It's called Eikal Chirokal. আমাকে নেবাতে পারে এত শক্তি রাখে না সময়, কখনো ভেবো না আমি সময়ের মুখ চেয়ে থাকি, সময় আমার সঙ্গে খেলে যাক যুদ্ধ যুদ্ধ খেলা, যতই কারুক শাড়ি লজ্জা বস্ত্র ঠিক থাকে বাকি, মন্ত্র বলে বেলা হয়ে যাবে সব যা ছিল অবেলা, ধর্মযুদ্ধে প্রতিবাদী চিরকাল দাঁড়ায় নির্ভয়, যেহেতু সপক্ষে তার ঈশ্বর সাধিত মহাকাল, স্বয়ং সারথি হয়ে সব বুহ ভাঙেন উত্তাল, যতই দিক না যুদ্ধ খণ্ডকাল হবে পরাজিত, এই তো জেনেছি শাস্ত্রে যতটুকু হয়েছে অধীত, অখণ্ড কালের পক্ষপাত ধন্য আমি মহাশয়, আমাকে রাঙাবে চোখ এত শক্তি রাখে না সময়। Right now, forever.
Sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you. Thank you. Time has not the power. Hold on. Something got changed here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
Great. Right now, forever. Time has not the power to extinguish me. Don't think for a moment that I wait upon time. Let time keep on playing his absurd battle game. Every time he strips me, I rise clothed without shame. With the force of prayer, of spells magic and divine, all that was untimely will turn auspicious, sublime. In a just war, the rebel stands forever unafraid. For her ally is eternity, who, divinely arrayed, guides her chariot, destroying the enemy line. Thus, a divisive age will be defeated and spurned. Though it brings on great wars, it will lose every time. From our epics, this is the truth I have learned. Please know that I am cherished by an undivided, infinite age. Time will never have the power to scorch me with its rage. Thank you so much. I know my poem doesn't do justice to Ma's original, but that I wanted to share both of those poems with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandana, so much for poems. And I think we'll now move over to the next part of the program. I have great pleasure in introducing Moushumi Bhomik, a widely respected singer who has, in a way, like traveled the whole of India and collected the voices of people whose voices are rarely heard. And we have been grateful to her for her collections of these songs and the songs that she has composed herself. A major figure in this whole field of studies and creative work, genuine creative work, in the field of a new music, which can't be classified in either of the old modes, the popular or the folk, which is completely new and original and vitally important for this phase of our culture in its strong social awareness, the spirit of protest. At the same time, Moushumi has been working at the moment on a PhD on old archival recordings from Bengal at the School of Cultural Texts and Records Jadavpur University. Welcome, Marsham.
Thank you, Shomikda. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah? All right. Thank you. Navunita, these lectures or classes outside the classroom, and I've been a part of that actually, because I was never really her direct student. But I think I learned from her, and I carry something of, I feel a kind of responsibility to carry on something that she's done and she's left us with, and as a student should do. And in a sense, in the spirit of matriarchy, I think, you know, we should carry on the legacy and the lineage of women. And therefore, the thing is that this project that Shomikda was mentioning, that I've been part of something which is called the Traveling Archive, and where we've been recording songs, making field recordings across Bengal, across this broken land of Bengal, and kind of finding the flows which defy all brokenness, you know, and sort of unite the fragments. So I've been doing that for a very long time now, about 2 decades, really, almost 2 decades. And but the thing is, I haven't really gone to Mymensingh so much. It's only last year that I went to Mymensingh for the first time and to Kishoreganj. But in 2014, we were launching an album of Shakti Chattopadhyay's songs, where Navunita Di was one of the, she was the guest speaker. We asked her to come to inaugurate, to launch the album. And because this is part of the project Traveling Archive, and we have a label, I mean, hardly a label, you know, but we have something called Traveling Archive Records, and we tried to bring out, this was the second album. The first one was songs, field recordings from Sylhet. And these were songs by 2 women who were in their 80s. So Chandrabhuti, and actually one of them is named Chandrabhuti Mashima, Chandrabhuti Rai Barman, and Shushama Das. So we had recorded them for about 8 years, going back and back to them, and they've come and stayed in my house. And so it's become a relationship of a different kind. And then we brought out this album, and when I went to invite Navunita Di for the Shakti Chattopadhyay launch, I asked her, if I gave her a copy of the Chandrabhuti Shushama album. And actually, when Navunita Di spoke, she spoke mainly about the Chandrabhuti Shushama album, and she talked about her own work. And in Mymensingh, and she said something very interesting. She said, look, as researchers, we go, we collect the material, and we come back, but we do not pay attention to the fact that these sounds that we are collecting, how important they are. And for one, after seeing your work, I feel that, you know, how important it is. So it is not, when we talk about comparative literature or as a comparativist, the point is, I think across media, we are also translating, if you're thinking about translating, we're translating between, I think, across different media. So we are also translating sound into text, and text into sound, and sound into image. All of that is also part of a translation process. So when Navunita Di is writing about Chandrabhuti, she is writing, and when Chandrabhuti is writing her song, she's actually writing something that she's hearing. So I think it's the sound that is being written. And I'll make a little attempt. My Mymensingh work really remains to be done. So I went to Kishoreganj and there met people who sing these songs. I actually met Harisuzzaman Haris, who's the son of Muhammad Saidur, who helped Nobunita Di in her work when she was researching. And Hares Bhai actually talked about Nobunita Di. And so Hares Bhai has promised to take me to some women who still sing these songs. And in Kishorganj and in Moymunsinh, actually, it's not just the Chandrabhuti Raman, but Raman itself is sung so differently. And there is Raman Gan is so popular there. And actually, the whole thing of Sita's story is, at least from the little that I've heard, Sita is principal to their telling of the story. I think it's really, really important the way they tell the Sita story. And there was someone called Shankar De, whom we recorded, and he sang Sita's pain in the way that Chandrabhuti would have felt this pain, I think, so it is very similar. So I've just got a little bit, I don't really know this kind of singing very well, and I feel a bit embarrassed too, because this is really such a unique way of singing, and my pronunciation and everything is going to be so wrong. But let's look at this as another translation, So this is not how it's meant to be, but what I'm able to do, just that much. So, and I thought these lines with which the Chandrabhuti Raman, the unfinished Chandrabhuti Raman ends, these lines are so relevant to this time. And it's ekdom Panchali, so it's just a very simple way of singing these lines. Bonete aguni jole je shayore chote bano unmotto pagolo praego boshile no ramo Ranga joba kirajer go shire rakto uthe Nashikaye Ogni Shasho Brahmorandro Kute যে আগুনে জ্বালাইলো আজ গো কুকুয়া ননদিনী সে আগুনে পুড়িবে সীতা গো শহীদ রঘু মনি পুড়িবে অযোধ্যাপুরী গো কিছু দিন পরে লক্ষ্মী শূন্য হইয়া রাজ্য গো যাবে ছাড়ো খারে পরের কথা কানে লইলে গো নিজের সর্বনাশ চন্দ্রাবতী কহে রাজের গো বুদ্ধি হইল নাশ So basically যে আগুনে পুড়ছে তো পুড়তে পুড়তে তো ছাই আমরা এমনি হয়ে যাচ্ছি ছাই তো মানে the kind of fire that is raging all around is so frightening really. And but I thought I want for Nandana and for Antara, I want to sing a little song which is about, again, in the spirit of matriarchy, in the spirit of the mother, and from where we come, from where your mother came, and from where our daughters will go, so in that spirit. This is a song that I think even Chandrabhuti Mashima and Shushama Mashima are like mothers to me. And today, my mother is sitting right next to me here. So I asked her to come and join, and so I'll show you. She's here. Can you see? Can you see her? There she is. Yeah. So I asked her to come, and so I'll sing this song, which is Batshollir Gan, which is a song of the mother's love for little Krishna. And Krishna is saying that I can't go to play because Ma is so worried for me, you know. So I just can't go because it's going to break her heart. So আমি যাব না আর গোচারণে শ্রীরাম রে তোর বিনয় কেনে আমি যাব না আর গোচারণে শ্রীরাম রে তোর বিনয় কেনে চূড়া বাঁধি নুপুর দিয়ে পায় আগে পা বাড়াইতে ভাইরে নিষেধ করে মায় চূড়া বাঁধি নুপুর দিয়ে পায় আগে পা বাড়াইতে ভাইরে নিষেধ করে মায়ে মায়ে যদি নিষেধ করে মায়ে যদি নিষেধ করে কেমনে যাব গোচারণে শ্রীরাম রে তোর বিনয় কেনে আমি মায়ের একলা কানা আমি বিনে আমার মায়ের আর তো লক্ষ নাই আমি মায়ের একলা কানা আমি বিনে আমার মায়ের আর তো লক্ষ নাই আমি গোষ্ঠে গেলে পরে আমি গোষ্ঠে গেলে পরে ভাঙবে মাথা পাষাণে শ্রীরাম রে তোর বিনয় কেনে মা হলেন জগতের সার মা বিনে শ্রীরাম ভাইরে দুনিয়ায় অন্ধকার মা হলেন জগতের সার মা বিনে শ্রীরাম ভাইরে দুনিয়ায় অন্ধকার মা জানে সন্তানের বেদন মা জানে সন্তানের বেদন পর কি পরাণ বেদন জানে শ্রীরাম রে তোর বিনয় কেনে আমি যাব না আর গোচারণে আমি যাব না আর উচ্চারণে শ্রীরাম রে তোর বিনয় কেনে শ্রীরাম রে তোর বিনয় কেনে Thank you.
Thank you so much, Moshe. That was so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
সাধু সাধু দারুণ দারুণ
It was a real tribute to Nobinita because it's the spirit that Nobinita always reveled in, this passion for life and these connections, deep-rooted connections around the woman. With that, we move on to the last panelist, I would say, in our program, Sangeeta Ani, based in Bengaluru. Her Sita's Ramayana, a graphic novel produced in collaboration with Mana Chitrakar Tapotua, was on the New York Times bestseller list. Her novel, The Missing Queen, also grows and weaves its narrative around Sita at its base. And she has been influenced in different ways by Nobinita in her experience. So we'd like to hear from her about her experiences with Nobinita's work and imagination. Sangeeta Ani.
Thank you so much for that. I feel slightly embarrassed speaking here today because I have been deeply influenced by her work in much of my own work. But I did not know her as very well, and I had the privilege of meeting Nobinita ji only once in my life. But it was a very momentous and something that I will never forget. And actually, if I may be permitted, Antara, would it be all right? I prepared a little slideshow with some pictures. Would that be all right to share?
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
Yes. If you can see this is the one time I had the privilege of meeting Nobinita ji when we were at the Goa Arts and Literary Festival together. And here, this is just a picture of her with two other writers, Anza Savindra Shekhar and Nidhi Dugar Kundalia. And we were stuck in the airport for 4 hours. So I would not have gotten through that impossible wait without her and the amazing stories that she told me. And I think it was only then that I really got a sense of her amazing vitality for life, her amazing storytelling. I had only known her from reading her work before, but it was at this moment that I actually also felt that she lived her work, because I'd been so fascinated by her work on Sita and the Ramayana. And it was as she was talking about Chandrabati and Mola at this moment, as if they were real characters living right there, gossiping about their love lives, saying I couldn't put that in my work because that's actually just a little bit of gossip and rumor. But it really made everything that she had written about really come to life. And I think that's something, that spirit, that vitality is something that I learned so much from, that I want to sort of live my life inspired by. But I was also very embarrassed when I met her. I mean, she had I had read her work, and she had sort of been this towering figure in my mind's eye. And I told her that, 2 of my books are based and owe a great deal to what the scholarship you have done. And at that point, she scolded me and she said, you should have told me this ages ago and you should have sent me copies of your book. Why are you doing this only now? And but it never crossed my mind to do that before, because in my mind there had been so much of a distance between us. It was only now that when I could actually meet her that I could say that to her. But she really reduced that distance, and I'm really grateful to her for that as well. How human and accessible she also was. So and in that sense also she becomes sort of an inspiring model to live by, and in how grounded she was as a person. I'm just trying, yeah, I think this is Professor Gombrich had already read this out when he was talking in his foreword, but this is something that I feel is the aspect of her legacy that my generation, I really feel we should sort of carry on that. And what I learned from her work, I grew up in a generation where when we talked about the Ramayana, we only talked about the mainstream Ramayana. The Ramayana that I knew growing up was the one that we watched on television, was the Valmiki or the Tulsidas Ramayana. And when I read her work, it's just sort of opened up so much for me. The idea that women themselves were storytellers, the idea that women could in fact subvert the narratives through song, through criticism, through so many different ways, that we could actually take control of narratives that had been created by men or curated by patriarchy, and in doing so subvert them and challenge them. And for me, that's also the meaning of tradition in many ways. When we talk about preserving the history, the myths, the stories of our past, there is also a way to challenge the meanings and the context that they leave us with. And I really feel that came alive for me from the way that Nobanita's research showed how women had across time, even without being literate, with being dispossessed, being marginalized and disenfranchised, were able to do that and shift the narrative to reflect their own experience, their own lived experience. I think that's also another part of, I mean, I'm also a reteller of myth, and I also learned that from her research, is that you have to use your own lived experience to infuse the stories with. I'm just sharing some of this translations that she did that were so powerful for me, particularly when it came to creating Sita's Ramayana. And this book would not have been possible without her work. It is a retelling of that's based on the Patua tradition, but we borrowed a lot from other traditions as well, and a lot of the understanding of how to subvert the Ramayana, how to challenge different kinds of retellings and contexts came from that. And I just wanted to show you what it looks like, because while work can be academic and it can exist in an academic form, that same spirit, that same idea can be used in a graphic novel that's meant for children and hopefully spread across the world and carry on that legacy. So just to show you a little bit of what it looked like, again, Sita is the primary figure in this narrative. And here she is weeping, as we see, or distraught as we see in some of the other earlier poems that that I put up there from Nobanita Ji's essay. So just to show you what it looked like, taking the Patua tradition as well and converting it into a graphic novel. And it's been a very successful book. It's used across the world. So I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to take all of this and be the kind and carry this sort of legacy on forward. And I come back to this idea again, and I think this is something that for me is really important as I continue to sort of question the way we myths and epics. My generation, that we know that this work has been done for us, that we have access to it, and that we can build upon it going forward in the future. What the question she raises here, they can be applied to so much of other Indic literature as well, and really question what we think of the epic and the kind of stories that leaves us with, the way that it fashions our social systems and belief systems. So I just wanted to share a little bit of that and give you a sense of how her work has influenced me and continues to live on, and hopefully access, and children and others can kind of access the understanding that she gives in her essays in this sort of new form as well, and how important that it is for us today, I think, to build a much more egalitarian culture, to have access to that. So thank you. And thank you, Antara, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm a little sorry I've not been the most articulate. I've been sort of overawed by seeing all the other names and faces on this call. But thank you so much for that. And I can't tell you how much to be the sort of, as Mosumi said, to sort of carry on that spirit, that legacy is something that I myself feel very much part of. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you, Samhita.
Antara, should we continue?
Yes.
Or should we round off here?
Well,
It's past 9:30 and
well, there was, we had...
I'm seeing so many people leaving also.
Yeah. Well, those who want to leave could, of course, do so. We were thinking of a quick question answer after this, a Q&A.
Yes.
So it's not yet 9:30, it's 9:25. So maybe we could have a quick 10 minutes of a Q&A. If there are questions, if anybody wants to ask a question, and let's see how it is. Are there questions?
Yes, Antaradi. And with your permission and with Mr. Bandyopadhyay's permission, if I could just say something before asking my question. Thank you, Nandanadi, for referring to Shritar Patrasandhan, the poem. And it is indeed very important that we heard about the girl who was standing near the window holding the grills. And I think Navanita Devsen's entire corpus of work dealt with looking and listening to those girls. So, and collecting their tears, listening to their tears. So I just wanted to read out of it 2 lines from one poem called Balmik, where she is directly talking to Valmiki and kind of rebuking him. So she writes, মধ্যদিনে দাঁড়িয়েছ রত্নাকর, চিনে নাও সংসার স্বজন, বুঝে নাও হিসেব নিকেশ, পুকুরে তাকিয়ে দেখো স্পর্শমাত্র সরে যায় জল. And then she refers to the impermanence of how this male standard of epic writing, and then she continues, বুঝি মনোযোগ চাও, কার মন, কার সঙ্গে যোগ, রত্নাকর, কি তোমার অর্জিত সঞ্চয়. And I think this is kind of incredible how in a moment she breaks the entire patriarchal standard of writing epics or creating epics. And with this, I just wanted to refer to her essays on Chandravati, where she talks about the Bengali historicists and how they silenced Chandravati in several ways because she was a woman. And with that, I would just come to my question to Moshumidi. I guess I would like to ask it to Moshumidi first. She was talking about Chandravati Mashima and the entire, the women that she worked with. And Navanita, in one of her essays, she talked that the women of Kishorganj did not know anymore who the writer of this, did not know the name of Chandravati anymore. Like there was this river and there was this temple on the name of Chandravati, but they were not aware that the songs that they were singing were originally composed by Chandravati. Also, there is a debate on who the idea of Chandravati basically is. But I just wanted to know from you, like, because you visited few years back, like after Navanita, did the women there know that they were singing Chandravati's songs? This is my first question. I'll just continue. I'll just end with my second question. And my second is, I think I'd like to ask this to Professor Bandyopadhyay, because I have read some of your work and you talked about how violence can have good and bad projections. And by deconstructing, if we may use the word, the entire idea of approaching literature, do you think that Navanita was creating or attempting a violence on the episteme of what we know and changing. Can we use the word violence on what Nobonita was actually doing by changing the entire idea of writing history or approaching history and writing literature?
Can you hear me? Can you
Yes,
hear
sir.
me? Am
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I audible?
Yes. Yes.
I wouldn't use the word violence because in Nobonita's case, the point that we have been making throughout, all of us this evening, is that there was a direct engagement with the entire reality on its being stabilized and almost petrified into a kind of strict, severe structure which is imposed on women and on the entire community. So it was not so much violence as challenging it, questioning it, and asking the rest of the community, the entire community, to critique and challenge continuously, never standing at a point. Now, whenever you bring in the concept of violence, there is a force which attacks, destroys, and violence always has a pressure, a focal point, a direction that completely overpowers and overwhelms the real people. Violence always ultimately. So a different kind of engagement, a more humanist, concerned, and yet every segment of reality that she addressed.
Thank you. And Moshamidi.
Yeah, so what I was saying is, see, firstly, I said that I haven't really worked so much in Mymensingh or Kishorganj. I've been there only once. And I did not go to record Ramayana or anything. I went for some other reason because of my other research. But of course, you go there and you find Ramayana. You're bound to find Ramayana Gan there, you know. And so the point about whether Chandrabhuti's name is remembered or not is a very difficult question to answer. Now, think of after, you see, when folklorists or folk researchers have already entered the scene, when people have already begun to engage with a poet or have discovered or rediscovered somebody, then the whole environment changes, you see. So now there will be a Chandrabhuti, an awareness of Chandrabhuti, which probably is not, so I will never find the time that Nobonita Di found. I will not be able to reach that time anymore. That time has changed. But in older people, you can ask, sometimes you get to know from them whether the practice, how much of the practice, and whether it's in the name or in somebody else's name, but the songs are still sung. Simon Zakaria has done a lot of work on the different Ramayans. So and then Haresh Bhai also told me that I'll take you to where the women sing. And so there are women, older women. Nobonita Di mentioned this Napit Bo and Bamun Bo, the two women who sang for her. And actually she's supposed to have, we are supposed to be finding those tapes and Antara and I, we are supposed to look for those tapes which she recorded. But I don't know, like how much of Chandrabhuti was remembered at the time when Nobonita Di went, and how much, and because the time is a different time now, you see.
Right, and also because I keep deep interest with your traveling archive work, and I just wanted to know that how do you think that we can circulate these songs of Chandravati and the songs on Ramayana by women in and around India during this time, because I think it is very important to listen to different alternative narratives during these very difficult times when we are not allowed to listen to anything.
I don't know the answers. You know, you are young, you know, you will find your way. I'm looking for my own way. I'm trying to do it in my own way, and you must find your own way too, I think.
I think that's very well answered, Moshumi. Thank you, Shuddhadeep. I saw fleetingly, I thought I saw Volga in our
Could I
group.
say something?
If can you hear me? Hi.
Ankara, can I say something? No. All right.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Is Volga still here?
Antaradi, I think Wendy
wanted to say something.
Okay, I can't see. Okay, yeah, Wendy.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I can't see you, but please do.
I'm here.
Yeah. I would just like to say briefly something. It was so wonderful to hear all of this. And for me to be there, Richard and Amartya, I think we both left, but to be with them and with Nabanita, in the sense that Nabanita is so present today, was so wonderful for me, coming back to 1960 in Harvard when we were all together so long ago. And I remember the work that Nabanita did then, which was so exciting. It was working on the Ramayana and working on it in relationship in many ways to Homer, to doing a formulaic structure in response to the Parry-Lord theory. And hearing today how far away she went from Homer and how deep into India she went, and just used the Western tradition as a springboard into an entirely different world that none of us could even have imagined then in 1960, in which folk variants and women's variants and politically dissident variants and so forth were the subject and not just sort of in the corners. It was just very exciting to see the young people here today too, and how far Nabanita's work went away from those happy days at Harvard in 1960. So I was so happy to be here and to see Richard and Amartya here too, and I was very grateful to you for letting me join you. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful to have you here with us.
Namaskar.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you very much.
Namaskar. I'm Shrota Dotto speaking. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. But I just want to make sure that Volga isn't. I thought I saw her.
Yeah, I am here, Antara.
Are you here, Volga? Hi.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could comment a bit, please, because you have also been working on Sita's retellings of Sita stories.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you, Antara. I'm very happy to be part of this great event. I enjoyed the whole event and the speeches, songs, and the rendition of Navanita's poems by Nandana. Everything is so beautiful. Navanita, they've said Ramayana stories are written in a way that she stretched their previous connections, meanings, purpose to create new political meanings. That is the greatness of her stories, I think. A new political purpose was gained to give a new understanding of the gender oppression and the communal violence. This she did with a matchless style, with a great sense of human empathy, which is finely mixed with a lot of humor. Her political sharpness puts right the context to the epic. So we should remember her political sharpness, whether it is Ramayana or whether it is her poems or her stories. Her Sita is different from many other Sitas created by contemporary writers. Her Sita is a mix of innocence, intelligence, natural, angry, and kind. Her research into various Ramayanas spread in India and South Asia gave flesh and blood to her Sita. I heard her reading one of her Ramayana stories in Calcutta, Hanuman and Sita as main characters. That is unique. I think I am not competent enough to talk on her Sita, but Navneeta, one very fortunate moment I have to share. Navneeta Devsane inaugurated my Sita Stories, Liberation of Sita, at Hyderabad in 2016. It was a great day in my life. From the first time I met her, I thought, she is an Indian writer, a true Indian writer writing in Bengali. She brought dignity to Indian women writers with her intellect, humor, empathy, and humaneness. Thank you, Antara.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Valga. You're quite right. We shouldn't forget for a minute that in spite of all the academic part and the fun, because Navneeta's stories were great fun.
I actually remember the time that you were talking about, Volga, when Ma read out that story, which was in Victoria Memorial. And it was a very,
yes,
it was a really happy time, and all of you were there together. I remember that very well. Thank you for reminding us of that.
Is there anybody else who would like to comment or ask a question?
Yes, I'm Shrutha Datta speaking. Can I ask?
Yes, very quick,
Namaskar.
please. Yeah.
Yes. Is it right to read or is there any politics there when you read when Navneeta Di compares Western epic with Indian epic, and he sort of counters the the trend that we are so used to. Simultaneously, what I find when someone talked about the violence, but what I find that is a very political stand of Navneeta Di. I don't know whether I'm right or wrong, but I find it very interesting to see that is that as a political stand to figure out femininity or feminism as a whole as countering violence with non-violence. That's it. I don't know whether I found in her, I haven't read much about her, but yeah, I found her.
Thank you for the question. Who would like to answer that? Shomik Mama or Mo Shumi or Samhita? Who would like to answer that? Or should we move on to the next question? I don't think Shweta, is that your name?
Srota.
Okay, Srota. Hi. Yeah,
Hi.
I think that's a very interesting question, and it is, of course, something that we need to look at carefully if we're doing a feminist reading of the epics. We will think about this, I'm sure, later on, but maybe this is not the time. Maybe if there's any other question, we could move on to that.
I just want to say one thing, actually, in the context of Ma's work, Shrota, I think you're quite right that she used the kind of feminism that we find in her retellings, in her humorous retellings of the Sita stories, do counter violence. So she writes a different,
Voice.
she turns around the story of violence, you know, in stories like The Aftermath. And there are many stories like that where her interpretation of war very different. And I think from that, in the context, I don't have the expertise to answer that in a larger context, but in the context of Ma's work, I think you're quite right to recognize that Ma's brand of feminism was in opposition to a mainstream tradition of violence. I think that's right.
Yeah, and to some extent, it actually opposes the violence that I personally see in feminism nowadays. Sorry to say that, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's quite right. I mean, I'm not saying that feminism today is quite violent. That is a different thing. There are all kinds of feminisms, I guess. But yes, this is one way of looking at the stories that I was trying to say earlier, that the humor, in many ways, Ma's humor was actually a way to dress up her very sharp political views. And it wasn't always satire, but it was a more accessible and easy humor. Sometimes it was satire, sometimes it was irony, but it was very political, as Volga had pointed out. And this is where the anti war and her stand against violence also becomes very clear. Is there any other question? Does anybody else want to comment?
Dipandita, you have to unmute yourself, I think. She's raising her hand on Toradi.
Okay. Dipandita, will you please, I don't know why I can't see any of this. Dipandita, will you unmute yourself? Is this Dipandita Roy?
Can you hear me? Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Dipandita Di.
Antara, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Can you speak
Antara,
loudly?
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First, okay. Okay.
Yes, this is much better. Thank you.
I want to tell something on Shrota's question. I think Navanta, all of us very courageous. There must maybe there may be humor, but we found that, and she's afraid of her, which is very unusual, and which is very natural for Navanta, which is very unusual for a traditional society, but which is very natural for Navanta. And in this context, I want to share something that I'm a student of Navantari. I studied 5 years in Jalapur University in comparative literature, and I've studied, and she had taught us epic. And before attending her classes, Ramayana, the traditional Ramayana, was
Maybe if you, Dipandita, you're breaking up. You're breaking up, Dipandita.
Tell our story, which is the foot of the. Hello.
Maybe if you switch
now
off your.
it's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Now it's that's a Bhakti movement product, and we thought that Ram is a god and there's Ram Sita is a goddesses, there's the avatar of Lakshmi and all that. But in her class, we first find out that Ram is not a god. Ram is just a human being. He has the human qualities, like he's jealous. He can do conspiracy also. He can even cheat her wife. And that is very normal human quality. And I think today India is going towards a time where this type of teaching, this type of concept, obviously necessary. And every moment I feel that what nobody teaches taught us, that is how much she made our life, how she made our views positive and human. That is very important, I think, today. And I think that I can share. And another thing that is literature. This Navanita's teaching of literature and was, I think, not different from science. But teaching of literature is not any language or flowery words or something like that. She always gave importance on logics and points and everything. And that also made us a very meticulous in our life and in our ways of the professional life and everything. That is. Thank you, Antara.
Thank you, Dipannita. So I think, is there, actually it was very nice to hear about my mother as a teacher, because this is, as Professor Gombrich said, this is about the teacher. So it was very nice. Thank you very much, Dipannita.
It was lovely.
Yeah. Is there anybody else who would like to comment, or if there are any questions or anything at all, then speak up now. And considering I can't see any hands being raised, if anybody else sees a hand raised, please mention it. Otherwise, maybe we could ask Opu to come and thank everyone, and we could conclude the program. What do you think, Shomik Mama? Mr. Shomik Bandyopadhyay, would you like to conclude and ask Opu to give the vote of thanks?
I think, yes, I can't see Opu. I don't know whether he is on the scene at all.
He's
so maybe I could thank. Are you there, Opu?
Yeah, yes. Achi ami.
Are you there, Opu?
Yes.
Achi.
Okay, so you have the last say. Go ahead. Last কথাটা তুমি বলো, শেষ কথাটা.
Would you like to conclude before you hand it back to Opu?
নমস্কার.
No, I think it's okay. Let Opu.
নমস্কার, আজকের এই অনুষ্ঠান এখানেই শেষ করব। তবে তার জন্মদিন উপলক্ষে আমরা গত বছর থেকে যে স্মারক বক্তৃতা শুরু করেছি, আশা করি আগামী দিনেও এই স্মারক বক্তৃতা আমরা করতে পারবো। এবং যে অবস্থায় এবছর আমরা জুমের মাধ্যমে করলাম, কিন্তু গত বছর আমরা করেছিলাম রবীন্দ্র সদনে, আশা করি এই রকম একটা পরিস্থিতি আগামী দিনে কাটিয়ে উঠতে পারবো। তখন আমরা আবার একসঙ্গে এরকম ভাবে নয়, একদম সরাসরি সামনে বসে আমরা এই অনুষ্ঠান করতে পারবো। আজকের এই অনুষ্ঠানে রিচার্ড গ্রম্বিচ, তাকে ধন্যবাদ জানাই। শ্রমিক জেঠু, যিনি এতক্ষণ ধরে এই অনুষ্ঠানে সভাপতিত্ব করলেন, তাকে ধন্যবাদ জানাই। মৌসুমী দিকে, সংহিতা দিকে এবং অন্তরাদি, নন্দনাদি, যার জন্য আজকে এই অনুষ্ঠানটা আমরা করতে পারলাম, দেজের পক্ষ থেকে আপনাদের সকলকে ধন্যবাদ। শুভরাত্রি।
ধন্যবাদ অপু, অনেক অনেক
Thank
ধন্যবাদ।
you. Thank you, Opu. Opu, just
Thank you, everybody.
thank you, everybody. Opu just mentioned that this was the second memorial lecture, and there's publishing hopes that we can continue the Nobunita Devsen memorial lectures for some more years to come.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Richard.
Yes, thank you so much, Richard. Is Richard still there?
Yes,
Richard's there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was
it's good to see you.
So amazing to have you here. And as Antara said, there were so many adverse circumstances despite which you gave us not one but two lectures. We feel, I can't tell you how grateful we both are. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.